For 1,000 people will die of thirst if I fail to recite 214 desert wells without a single mistake. 6 leagues away, 11 of our men are pinned under a shattered wagon with less than 4 hours to live. The guild master says one man cannot walk 2 paths across the salt at the same time. He does not know I can tear a second living body straight from my ribs, even if it costs my own mind. The noon sun on the Whitepan does not warm your skin. It hammers it like an anvil until your teeth ache. White salt stretched in every direction to the flat horizon, blindingly bright and burning straight through the soles of my boiled leather boots. 4,000 people stood packed around the central muster line, their wagon wheels locked hub to hub in a massive circle of sun-bleached cedar. Nobody spoke above a rasping whisper, because out here every breath of hot wind steals a drop of moisture from your tongue. I pulled Ovid Sarn's oversized straw hat lower over my forehead, wincing as the coarse brim scratched against my sunburnt temples. Ovid had died 6 days ago of heatstroke right in his own cot, his heavy leather boots still laced tight to his feet. He had died without passing on a single route, leaving 214 well locations locked inside my head as the caravan's sole map. Around my neck hung my brass-tasting cup, dented and warm against my chest, alongside 80 feet of knotted hemp step cord. Across the chalk-white muster chalk line stood Idris Pharaoh, smiling beneath the indigo canopy of the 9-fold trade guild. Idris wore clean linen robes, unspotted by salt slurry, and his skin was shaded by 4 massive silk umbrellas held by muscular draft hands. "It is good to see you standing tall, young Master Ossa," Idris called out, his baritone voice carrying easily across the silent crowd. He took 2 measured paces forward onto the open salt, offering a polite half-bow that looked completely sincere. "The 9-fold caravan holds no malice toward the wheel market," Idris continued, gesturing toward the 3 brass tokens pinned to his silk vest. "We purchased the exclusive draw rights to the next 3 watering holes along the spine: Bitter Well, 5 Pint Sump, and the High Churn. Our contract with the Great Pan Combine is sealed in wax, but we honor the ancient law of the road before any merchant charter." My sister Sabra stepped up beside me, the brass scales at her belt clicking sharply against her iron water canteen. Sabra didn't smile at his velvet words. She merely squinted through her blackened grease goggles, calculating the water weight of every man in sight. "Name the terms, Idris," Sabra said, her voice dry as rattling dry straw. "The noon heat is peaking, and our oxen cannot stand in the traces forever." Idris gave an apologetic sigh, pressing his palm flat against his chest as if he genuinely hated what he had to say next. "The custom is known to every child who ever tasted salt," Idris replied smoothly. "The proving must be walked before the trade wells unlock. The surviving wayfinder of the wheel market must step onto the salt before the crowd and recite the line without hesitation. 214 wells, named in sequence from the southern rim to the jagged spine, accompanied by taste, depth, and step count. A single error in the chain forfeits your passage, and your wagons must turn back 3 weeks across the dry pans." A low, terrified murmur swept through the assembled families of the wheel market like dry grass catching a spark. If we turned back, half the draft beasts would collapse within 3 days, and our reserve barrels would be bone dry inside a week. "I know the road, Idris," I said, stepping past Sabra until my toes touched the white chalk line dividing our caravans. "Ovid taught me every ditch from here to the Salt Mountains before his heart gave out," I added, holding my voice steady. "I have no doubt of your brilliance, June," Idris said warmly, nodding with genuine admiration. "Which is why I brought a notary to record each pace." "We shall begin the formal recitation immediately," Idris said, raising one gloved hand to signal his scribes. "Take the platform, boy." Before I could take another step onto the raised salt platform, a shrill scream cut through the heavy heat from the rear wagons. A lone outrider on an exhausted, foam-flecked salt runner came tearing down the perimeter lane, scattering bystanders aside in a cloud of white powder. The beast's legs gave out 30 paces from the muster line, throwing the rider hard against the packed salt crust. The scout didn't stay down. He scrambled forward on bloody knees, His lips cracked and blackened from extreme dehydration. "Wayfinder!" the man croaked, clutching wildly at the hem of my dust cloak. "The primary water crew. They didn't make the ridge." Sabra dropped to one knee instantly, unhooking a measured 2-ounce dropper from her belt and forcing moisture past his blistered lips. "Speak clearly, Geth," Sabra demanded, keeping her hand clamped firmly on the dropper's brass valve. "Where is the wagon?" "6 leagues out, near the mouth of the red sump," Geth wheezed, trembling violently under the merciless glare of the midday sun. "The rear axle shattered clean through when we hit a hidden salt cavity under the wind crust," the scout gasped out. "Master Brandt and 11 crewmen are pinned beneath the water tank, baking in the open basin with 0 canvas shade. The salt glare at the sump is 90 degrees reflected heat right now. They have less than 4 hours before the heat stroke cooks their brains." A cold dread pierced straight through the sweltering heat, seizing my stomach like a clenched fist. "6 leagues through the red sump?" Sabra whispered, her weathered face draining of what little color the sun had left her. "The shifting drifts around the red sump change every time the southern gale blows," Sabra muttered, looking up at me in sheer panic. "A standard relief team will drive right into a sinkhole without a certified wayfinder reading the subsurface crust ahead of the draft lines. June is the only person in this basin who knows the ground path to the red sump without a chart," she added, her knuckles whitening against her canteen. I looked over at Idris Pharaoh, whose pleasant smile had vanished into a look of solemn, measured sympathy. "This is a terrible tragedy, June," Idris said softly, lowering his head in apparent grief. "Truly, my heart aches for Master Brandt and his men." "Then wave the proving until sundown," I demanded, stepping close enough to feel the cold shade of his silk canopy. "Let me take the light skiff, run the 6 leagues to stabilize the axle, and guide the water crew back to safety. I will stand on your platform the moment the sun dips and recite every well until my throat bleeds." Idris shook his head slowly, raising both hands in a gesture of helpless administrative regret. "You know the 9-fold guild charter as well as I do, Master Ossa," Idris replied with heavy sorrow in his eyes. "The trade gate opens at high noon, or the contract defaults to the regional combine at sundown. If you leave the muster line before the proving is recorded, the wells remain locked under armed guard by guild law. If 4,000 people cannot draw from Bitter Well by dusk, the wheel market will riot before midnight for lack of water." "I cannot bend the contract, June," Idris added gently. "I have 7 merchant masters watching my every move from those canopy wagons. You're asking me to choose between 11 men baking to death in the sump and 4,000 people dying of thirst on the line," I snapped. "The pan does not offer pleasant choices, Wayfinder," Idris said, his voice entirely devoid of malice yet brutally unyielding. "One man cannot walk 2 paths across the salt at the same hour," Idris noted. "That is simply the natural law of the world." Sabra grabbed my forearm, her fingers digging through my rough linen sleeve until her nails bit skin. "June, think," Sabra hissed under her breath, pulling me back toward the shadow of our lead wagon. "If you ride for the red sump, Idris locks the pumps, and we don't have enough water in the reserve barrels to last the night. If you stay here and walk the proving, Brandt and his boys are dead carcasses by 4 in the afternoon. We don't have another wayfinder, June," she whispered, her voice cracking with a despair she had never shown in her life. "Ovid died 6 days too early." I looked down at my trembling palms, feeling the heat rising off the salt through the thick hide of my boots. For 4 nights, a set of impossible, luminous words had hung suspended in the dark air above my sleeping mat. I had thought it was a fever dream brought on by the sudden weight of Ovid's death and the endless glare of the pan. But now, staring at the impossible choice before me, the translucent blue and gold letters flared into existence behind my eyelids. Second self, bound. Copies allowed at once. 3. Price of 1 copy. 1 memory, chosen by the system, not by you. Memories taken. 0. Wells remembered. 214. The panel hovered silently in my peripheral vision, indifferent to the 4,000 terrified souls watching my every breath. It offered no grand power, no torrential rainstorms to flood the dry wells, and no magical carriages to cross 6 leagues in a heartbeat. It offered only another pair of hands, another set of eyes, and another body made of identical flesh and blood. But the cost was written in black and white clarity right across the center of my mind. One memory, stripped away forever. I couldn't choose what it took. The system would reach into the library of my 10 years of grueling training and tear out a page at random. If it took a childhood memory of Sabra, I could live with the loss. If it took the taste of honey or the face of my mother, my heart would break, but the caravan would survive. But if it reached into the 214 road points that kept this entire civilization alive, a piece of the map would vanish forever.
Yun?
Sabra asked, noticing the strange, fixed stare in my eyes. What are you looking at? Sabra, get the fastest 2-mule rescue skiff hitched to the rear traces. I ordered quietly, never taking my eyes off the empty air. What are you talking about? She asked, her brow furrowing with fierce confusion. You can't leave the muster platform. Hitch the skiff, load 3 spare axle timbers, and put 4 barrels of salted wash in the bed. I repeated, my tone turning rigid as iron. And tell the skiff driver to hold the reins tight, because a Wayfinder will be sitting on the driver's bench in less than 2 minutes. June, you are the only Wayfinder we have, Sabra shouted, drawing startled glances from the nearest wagon masters. Not anymore, I whispered, stepping away from her grip and walking deliberately toward the raised salt platform. The platform was nothing more than an 8-foot dais carved out of compressed, crystalline white rock salt, exposed to the blinding zenith of the sun. Every eye in the 4,000-strong market turned toward me as my boots crunched up the rough-hewn steps. Idris watched me with mild curiosity, leaning forward against the carved mahogany railing of his indigo shadebox. Are you ready to begin the recitation, Master Ossa? Idris called out, his notary dipping an iron quill into black gall ink. I am ready to settle the road, Idris, I said, my voice echoing off the curved cedar sides of the surrounding wagons. I took off Ovid Sarn's oversized straw hat and tossed it onto the salt floor at my feet. I unhooked the 80-foot knotted step cord from my shoulder and let its heavy hemp coils drop beside the hat. The heat beat down directly onto the crown of my head, sharp and blinding, but I stood straight and raised both hands toward the open sky. I did not hide behind a wagon. I did not whisper secret words in a shadowed tent where no one could see. If I was going to pay the terrible price of this strange power, I wanted 4,000 witnesses to know why I had done it. Activate, I commanded in the silence of my own thoughts, focusing every ounce of my will onto the floating panel. Second self. Split. For a single heartbeat, the blinding white glare of the noon sun seemed to swallow every shadow across the entire salt plain. Then, a brilliant, warm amber light began to bleed directly out of the pores of my skin, glowing through my sweat-stained linen shirt. The crowd let out a collective gasp of shock, hundreds of people instinctively stumbling backward against the wagon tongues. Idris Pharaoh shot up out of his cushioned chair, his velvet composure shattering completely as his eyes went wide with genuine disbelief. What is that? Idris muttered, gripping the canopy post so hard his knuckles turned white. What is he doing? The light did not burn. It felt like a thick, honey-like heat pulling violently at the marrow of my bones. The amber radiance expanded outward from my chest, forming a shimmering, luminous silhouette that detached slowly from my right side. It was like peeling wet parchment from a printing block, the light tearing away with a sound like tearing silk. Flesh knit together within the golden haze in fractions of a second. Veins threading through muscle, bones snapping into place, skin sealing tight. 2 feet hit the salt platform with a heavy, solid thud right beside my own boots. The blinding radiance collapsed back into the midday air, vanishing into the harsh white glare of the Whitepan. Standing beside me on the salt platform was me. He wore the exact same sun-bleached linen trousers, the same grease-stained vest, and the same scuffed leather boots. He had the same sharp, sunburnt nose, the same dark circles of exhaustion under his eyes, and the same scar across his left thumb. He turned his head and looked at me, his chest heaving with the exact same ragged rhythm as mine. "Damn," the copy said, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "The sun really is worse up here." Absolute, pin-drop silence fell over the 4,000 people gathered in the central muster circle. Even the draft oxen seemed to stop chewing their cud, the entire basin freezing beneath the scorching noon sky. Sabra stood frozen by the chalk line, her mouth slightly open, the brass water dropper hanging loose in her paralyzed fingers. Idris took 3 rapid, involuntary steps forward until he reached the very edge of his shade canopy, staring at the two of us in sheer shock. "Sorcery?" Idris breathed, his voice stripped of all its polished elegance. "No. There is no mana signature in the air." "What is this?" Before I could answer him, a violent, sickening sensation tore through the center of my skull like a hot iron hook. It wasn't a physical headache. It felt as though someone had reached into a shelf in my mind and violently ripped out a heavy, leather-bound volume. I stumbled backward half a pace, clutching the sides of my head as a cold, terrifying emptiness opened in my thoughts. The translucent system panel flashed violently in the center of my vision, its golden borders pulsing with urgent light. Second self, successful. Active copies, 1/3, price extracted, 1 memory deleted. Memories taken, 1, wells remembered, 214-213. The numbers on the floating display burned into my sight with merciless, mechanical precision. 213. One of the road points was gone. I frantically raced through the mental catalog of the Whitepan that Ovid had drilled into me for 10 brutal years. First well, bitter well, 5-pint sump, high churn, red sump, cinder basin. I counted and traced the lines across the white salt in my mind, searching desperately for the gap. Between the 17th well at Copper Lip and the 19th well at Salt Fork, there was a vast, terrifying void. I knew there was a watering hole there. I knew its distance was roughly 4 miles north of the broken gypsum bluffs. But its name, the depth of its water table, the smell of its sulfur crust, and the knotted step count required to find its hidden cap were completely gone. It was as if that stretch of the earth had never existed in my life, leaving only a blank, white scar in my memory. A cold sweat broke out across my ribs, chilling me despite the 100-degree heat radiating from the salt below. The system had not taken a trivial memory of my childhood. It had struck straight at the foundation of what kept me alive. My copy looked over at me, his eyes wide with the exact same realization and horror. Because he had been split from me at the moment of activation, he shared every thought I had up to the split, including the sudden, yawning void at well 18. "You felt that too, didn't you?" the copy whispered, his voice shaking slightly as he looked down at his own trembling hands. "Yeah," I muttered back, forcing my breathing to steady as I locked eyes with the copy. "I felt it. Well 18 is gone," the copy murmured, a bitter, nervous smile touching the corners of his cracked lips. "We don't know what it tastes like, and we don't know how many steps it takes to reach it from Copper Lip. We'll worry about well 18 when the caravan reaches the northern bluffs," I said firmly, refusing to let the panic take root. "Right now, Brant and 11 men are dying in the red sump, and Idris is waiting for his proving." The copy nodded once, the fear in his posture instantly hardening into the stubborn, pragmatic resolve we had shared our whole lives. He bent down, picked up Ovid Sarn's oversized straw hat from the salt platform, and pulled it down firmly over his brow. Then he reached down, gathered the 80 feet of knotted hemp step cord, and slung it across his shoulder with practiced ease. "Which one of us is riding the skiff?" the copy asked, looking at me with a wry, lopsided grin. "You take the skiff to the red sump," I said, pointing down toward the rear lane where Sabra was finishing the hitch. "You have the full memory of the route to the sump up to this exact second. The drifts haven't changed since morning. I'll stay here on the platform and walk the proving line in front of Idris and his scribes. The copy nodded, adjusting the dented brass tasting cup that hung from his neck. "Don't choke on the recitation, original," the copy said, turning toward the platform steps. "And try not to forget where we left our boots." "Just get Brant back alive before 4 o'clock, I replied, watching him take the steps 2 at a time. The copy leaped off the bottom step, hitting the muster flat at a dead sprint and heading straight for Sabra's rescue skiff. Sabra stood frozen by the skiff's traces, staring in wide-eyed shock as the second Jun Ossa vaulted directly into the driver's bench. "Sabra, hand me the reins," the copy yelled, snapping her out of her stupor with the familiar, impatient cadence of my voice. She blinked rapidly, her instincts taking over as she threw the heavy leather leads up into his outstretched hands. "June? What did you do?" she stammered, running alongside the skiff as the 2 draft mules snorted in the heat. "No time, sister," the copy shouted, cracking the reins hard over the mules' dusty flanks. Clear the lane for the rescue team." The crowd parted like water before the speeding skiff, hundreds of wagon hands shouting and scrambling out of the way of the spinning iron wheels. Within seconds, the rescue wagon shot out through the southern perimeter gate, throwing up a towering rooster tail of white salt dust as it tore toward the red sump. I stood alone on the raised salt platform, the blistering noon wind whipping my sweat-soaked shirt against my ribs. I turned slowly back toward the 9-fold shade canopy, where Idris Pharaoh was still standing, his mouth half open in stunned silence. His scribes sat paralyzed with their ink quills hovering uselessly in the air, several black droplets staining their pristine parchment sheets. "Well, Master Pharaoh?" I called out, my voice ringing loud and clear across the motionless muster grounds. "You demanded the ancient proving before high noon, and you hired a notary to record every pace. I am standing on your platform, under the open sun, ready to name the road." Idris slowly regained his composure, swallowing hard as he smoothed the front of his fine indigo linen robes. A sharp, assessing glint replaced the shock in his eyes, the look of a master merchant who realized the game had completely changed. "You split your very flesh before 4,000 witnesses, June," Idris said, his tone dropping to a low, intense rumble. "In all my years crossing the Whitepan, I have never seen a Wayfinder wield an art like that." "It is no art," I replied coldly, feeling the hollow ache inside my skull where Well 18 used to live. "It is just the price of doing business on the salt." "Then let us see if your mind remained whole during the parting," Idris said, gesturing sharply to his scribes. "Begin with Well 1 at the southern rim," the chief notary declared, his quill scratching nervously against the ledger. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the burning glare through my eyelids, and began the long, rhythmic chant of the road. "Well 1, Pebble Draft," I stated clearly, my voice falling into the hypnotic tempo Ovid had beaten into me as a boy. "Distance, 400 paces north-northwest from the Black Horn outcrop. Depth, 12 spans to the gravel floor. Water is sweet with a faint chalk grit, safe for draft beasts and infants alike." The notary scribbled furiously, nodding once to confirm the entry matched the ancient trade archives. "Well 2, Bitter Lip," I continued, taking one measured step forward across the platform. "Distance, 8,200 paces north along the primary salt ridge. Depth, 9 spans. Heavy magnesia content. Must be cut with charcoal meal before boiling." Step by step, name by name, the ancient map poured from my mouth while the sun climbed to its absolute peak in the sky. But beneath the steady, rhythmic recitation, cold panic clawed relentlessly at the back of my throat. I was at Well 14. Well 15 was coming in less than 2 minutes. And 3 steps past Well 17 lay the empty, terrifying void where the system had eaten my memory. "Well 15, Gilded Silt," I called out, my dry voice scraping against the roof of my mouth like coarse sandstone. "Distance, 5,100 paces northeast from the chalk towers. Depth, 14 spans through compressed gypsum. Water carries a heavy lime bite and must settle in cedar buckets for 2 hours before boiling." The chief notary's iron nib scratched across the heavy vellum roll, spitting tiny flecks of black ink onto the salt-whitened writing desk. Recorded and verified against the Southern Pan ledger, the notary announced, his voice muffled behind his linen dust mask. Well 16, Crow's Wash. I pushed forward without allowing my lungs a full breath of the scalding air. Distance: 6,400 paces along the Dry Creek Depression. Depth: 6 spans. Cold, bitter brine, suitable only for washing hide and cooling overheated iron axles. Idris Pharaoh remained standing by the carved mahogany railing of his indigo shadebox, his amber eyes tracking every twitch of my throat. Recorded and verified. The notary intoned again, blowing a pinch of fine river sand across the wet line to dry the ink. Well 17, Copper Lip, I declared, my knuckles locking into tight fists at my sides as my heart hammered against my ribs. Distance: 9,000 paces north-northwest, hugging the base of the lower red clay shelf. Depth: 11 spans to the red shale basin. Water tastes of rusted copper and sweet iron, drinkable if strained through raw wool. The notary drew a single, heavy black line beneath the 17th entry, setting his brass straightedge down with an audible clink. 17 points confirmed without variance. The notary called out to the silent assembly of 4,000 market dwellers. I drew in a ragged breath to speak the next name, but the words withered into complete, horrifying silence behind my teeth. Beyond Copper Lip, my mind struck a solid, impenetrable wall of blank white stone. I knew the red clay shelf ended where the broken gypsum bluffs began, roughly 4 miles north into the shimmering heat mirage. I knew Well 19 Salt Fork sat tucked inside the shadow of the twin split boulders on the far side of the flats. But the well that connected them, the vital oasis that every thirsty wagon train needed to survive that brutal crossing, was completely missing from my skull. Its name was gone. Its knotted step count was gone. Its mineral tang, its draw depth, and the specific smell of its damp crust had been erased as if they had never entered my ears during 10 years of training under Ovid Sarn. A thin bead of sweat rolled down the bridge of my nose, sizzling as it hit the boiling salt platform beneath my boots. If I gave a false name or miscalculated the distance by 20 paces, Idris's scribes would instantly flag the discrepancy against the guild archives. If I fell silent for more than 10 seconds, the ancient law of the proving considered the recitation broken and forfeited the draw rights for 4,000 people. Hold the line. Idris Pharaoh's smooth, resonant voice suddenly cut through the heavy midday silence before the pause could stretch into failure. Idris stepped down from his shaded box, raising one gloved hand toward his scribes and the waiting crowd. The road custom of the Southern Pan is ancient, but it is not barbaric, Idris said, projecting his warm baritone across the muster flat. Every 17 drafts, the Wayfinder is entitled to 3 minutes of shade and a measured cup of wash to clear the salt grit from his teeth. We do not wish to hear the wheel market claim their boy failed on account of a parched throat, he added with a generous, disarming smile. The chief notary nodded in agreement, carefully placing an ivory paperweight across the vellum ledger to mark the pause at well 17. Before the notary's hand even lifted from the desk, a strong, calloused grip seized the fabric of my linen sleeve and yanked me down off the platform steps. Sabra did not waste a single second with polite ceremony as she dragged me straight toward the narrow sliver of shade behind her water distribution wagon. The heavy cedar wagon stood only 20 paces from the muster platform, its iron-banded oak casks groaning under the blistering zenith of the sun. Sabra shoved me down onto a low wooden crate between the wagon's rear axle and the massive copper distribution manifold. "Sit," she hissed under her breath, dropping onto one knee directly in front of me with the ruthless efficiency of a field surgeon. The dark canvas tarp overhead blocked the blinding glare of the sky, but the trapped heat under the wagon felt like an open baker's oven. Sabra reached to her leather belt, unscrewing the brass cap of a small, graduated glass vial filled with chilled charcoal-filtered well water. She didn't offer me the vial to drink. Instead, she pressed 2 fingers firmly into the side of my neck, measuring my rapid pulse against the clicks of her pocket chronometer. 110 beats, Sabra muttered, her gray eyes narrowing behind her grease-smudged goggles as she examined my pupils. Your skin is clammy, your pupils are dilated to pins, and your hands are shaking like a novice on his first salt crossing, she said. She used a brass eyedropper to place exactly 6 drops of cool water onto my cracked tongue, forcing me to swallow before granting a single drop more. Now tell me what in the names of the 7 salt gods just happened up on that platform, June? Sabra whispered, her voice dropping to a harsh, dangerous rasp. I made a copy of myself, Sabra, I replied, leaning my head back against the sun-warmed cedar spokes of the water wheel. You split your flesh like a loaf of ration bread in front of 4,000 screaming people, she snapped, leaning in so close I could smell the vinegar on her collar. I felt that boy's hands when I handed him the mule reins, she continued, her knuckles whitening around the brass dropper. He had your pulse, your calluses, and the exact same crooked fingernail you smashed in the blacksmith's tongs 4 summers ago. He is flesh and blood, Sabra, I said, trying to keep my breathing from betraying the sheer terror pounding in my chest. He is driving 3 axle timbers and 4 barrels of wash toward the red sump right now, and he knows every drift between here and Brant's wagon. And what did it cost you? She demanded, grabbing my chin with her rough, calloused fingers and forcing my face toward the dim light. Nothing on the Whitepan is free, June, she said, her voice trembling with an emotion she fought desperately to suppress. A draft beast costs grain, a wagon will cost iron, and magic like that doesn't fall out of an empty sky without a bill attached. Look at me and tell me what was taken, she demanded, her eyes searching every line of exhaustion on my sunburnt face. I pulled my face gently out of her grasp, reaching down to unbuckle my worn leather knapsack from my shoulder. It takes a memory, I confessed quietly, staring down at the cracked leather straps in my lap. 1 single memory per copy, chosen entirely by the system that awoke inside me when Ovid died. Sabra froze, her hand hovering midway between her utility belt and the water canteen. A memory of what? She asked, her voice turning razor-sharp with immediate, calculating practical dread. Did you forget our mother's maiden name? She asked, leaning closer. Did you forget how to lace your boots? Or what year the Great Pan flooded? I wish to the gods it was my mother's name, I muttered under my breath, unrolling the knotted hemp step cord I kept in my pack. I ran my trembling fingertips along the rough hemp fiber, counting the hard, greasy knots that Ovid had tied with his own hands 10 years ago. Each knot represented 100 paces across the blinding white expanse of the salt plain. Each knot was tied with a specific twist, a double half-hitch for sweet water, a square knot for sulfur, a bite for heavy salt. I counted up to knot 17, feeling the familiar, reassuring bite of the hemp against my skin. Then my fingers slid onto knot 18, and the universe turned into an empty, hollow blank. In my mind, the mental map of the Whitepan was supposed to be a continuous, unbroken chain of 214 iron links. Ovid had beaten that chain into my memory through 10 years of relentless, merciless drills under the scorching midday sun. He would blindfold me with black wool, drop me in the middle of a barren salt pan, and make me name the nearest 4 wells purely by the smell of the wind. Now, link 18 had been violently torn out of the chain with iron pliers, leaving 2 jagged, disconnected ends hanging over a bottomless chasm. It took well 18, I whispered, the words tasting like ashes on my dry tongue. Sabra went completely motionless, her breath catching audibly in her throat as she stared at my knotted cord. Well 18, she repeated, her sharp mind instantly tracing the trade route north from the lower red clay shelf. That's the bitter reed sump, she whispered, her eyes widening with absolute terror behind her goggles. That's the only watering hole in a 20-mile stretch of blistered gypsum between Copper Lip and Salt Fork. I don't know, I admitted, closing my eyes as cold sweat drenched the collar of my shirt. I don't know if it's called bitter reed sump, or dry reed, or reed basin. I don't know if the water is 12 spans deep or 20 spans deep. I don't know if it smells of rotten eggs or bitter copper. And I don't know how many 100 paces it takes to reach it from the red clay shelf. June, That well sits right in the dead center of the territory the ninefold caravan bought last winter. Sabra hissed, grabbing my shoulder with bruising force. Idris Pharaoh knows that specific well better than his own bedroom in the trade cities. He bought the draw rights to it 3 months ago, which means his scribes have the exact depth and sulfur rating written in gold ink on that parchment roll. If you stumble on well 18, Idris will declare the proving broken before you finish the sentence. If the proving is broken, our wagons stay locked on this dry flat while our oxen die in their traces, she added, her voice shaking. I looked down at my hands, forcing my fingers to stop trembling as I gripped the 18-knot mark on the hemp cord. Active copies. 1/3. Memories taken. 1. Wells remembered. 213. The translucent system text hovered stubbornly in the dim shade beneath the wagon, cold and entirely indifferent to the catastrophe it had created. It had given me an extra pair of hands to save 12 men from cooking in the red sump, but it had carved out the exact piece of foundation I needed to keep 4,000 others alive. Can you reconstruct it? Sabra asked, her practical mind already racing through emergency options. Copper Lip is 9,000 paces from Crow's Wash, she said, leaning over my knee. Salt Fork is 14,000 paces from the Gypsum Bluffs. Can you calculate the midpoint and fake the water description using standard gypsum basin minerals? A standard Wayfinder might fall for a guess description, Sabra, I said, shaking my head grimly. Idris won't. Idris brought 3 master notaries who spent 6 months surveying the ninefold acquisition with brass-sounding rods. They know the exact mineral parts per gallon, the taste of the sediment, and whether the water needs cedar straining or charcoal boiling. If I miss the description by a fraction of an ounce of sulfur, Idris will smile, bow politely, and turn 4,000 people back toward the desert. A pair of polished leather boots crunched softly against the crystalline salt crust just outside the shadow of our wagon. Sabra instantly snapped her mouth shut, smoothly sliding the glass vial back into her tool belt with practiced stealth. She grabbed a clean linen rag, dipped it into an open wash bucket, and began wiping the salt crust from my forehead with deliberate, unhurried strokes. Keep your breath steady, she muttered without moving her lips. He's here. The heavy indigo silk of a parasol dipped beneath the canvas awning, casting a rich purple shadow across the wooden floorboards. Idris Pharaoh stepped into the narrow space between the water casks, offering a warm, respectful bow that seemed entirely natural. He did not carry weapons, and he did not bring an armed escort of guild enforcers. He carried only a small silver smelling box and his unshakable, effortless poise. Master Ossa, Mistress Sabra, Idris greeted us, his voice carrying the smooth, comforting cadence of a wealthy uncle visiting family. I trust the shade is providing some relief from the Whitepan's midday fury? He asked, tucking his silver smelling box into his silk sash. My brother's throat was dry from the chalk wind, Master Pharaoh, Sabra replied coolly, never pausing her rhythmic wiping of my brow. The wheel market appreciates your adherence to the old road courtesy of the 17-draft rest. The road courtesy is the only thing that separates civilized merchants from salt scavengers, Mistress Sabra, Idris said with genuine warmth. He turned his gaze toward me, his amber eyes glittering with intense, fascinated curiosity. I must confess, June, Idris said, stepping closer until he was standing just 2 feet from my wooden crate. In 20 years of traveling the trade spines from the southern coast to the northern salt peaks, I have witnessed many wondrous sights. I have seen glass singers melt the dunes into crystal ramparts, and I have seen deep well diviners pull sweet water from barren granite. But I have never seen a young man pull a second living body out of his own ribs with nothing more than a flash of golden light. It was quite breathtaking, Idris added, tapping the polished pommel of his small walking cane against the salt crust. A trick of the glare, Master Pharaoh? I said, keeping my voice flat, dull, and completely devoid of pride. The sun plays games with a man's eyes when he spends 10 hours a day staring at white salt. Idris let out a rich, melodious chuckle that sounded entirely friendly and completely unconvinced. A trick of the glare does not drive a two-mule rescue skiff 6 leagues out toward the red sump at a full gallop, Idris noted, smiling broadly. My outriders watched that skiff clear the southern perimeter gate 3 minutes ago. They tell me the young driver handled the reins with the exact same distinctive left-handed flick that Ovid Sarn used to train into his apprentices. You sent a piece of yourself to save Master Brandt and his crew, didn't you? A wayfinder does what is necessary to keep the wheel market moving, I replied, refusing to look away from his piercing gaze. A noble sentiment, Idris said, nodding in sincere, unreserved admiration. Truly noble. Most young men with a gift of that magnitude would hoard it for themselves, or sell it to the Great Pan combined for a chest of gold tokens. To spend it on 11 common axle hands baking in a ditch shows a character that does honor to old Ovid's memory. He paused, his smile softening into an expression of gentle, administrative solemnity that carried more weight than an executioner's axe. Which is precisely why it would grieve me terribly to see you stumble on the salt platform, June, Idris continued softly. Sabra's hands paused on the linen rag for a fraction of a second before resuming their steady, mechanical motions across my temple. June has walked this road 12 times since he was 12 years old. Idris, Sabra said, her voice dropping into a flat, defensive monotone. He knows every ditch and sump by heart. I have no doubt of his past accomplishments, Mistress Sabra, Idris replied smoothly, shifting his walking cane to his other hand. But splitting one's flesh and soul is a heavy tax on the mortal vessel. Even now, I can see the strain in your brother's eyes, the slight tremble in his fingers, the way he clings to that knotted cord as if it were a lifeline. Idris leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper beneath the creaking cedar wagon. The proving is an unforgiving master, June, he said, looking straight into my eyes with genuine concern. The ninefold charter requires absolute, unbroken fidelity to the road record. My scribes carry the sealed survey ledgers of the Great Pan Combine, signed in red wax by 3 independent cartographers. Every landmark must be named in its exact consecutive order. Every depth must match the seasonal water table within half a span. Every mineral taste and sediment weight must be recited without a single omission or substitution. If a wayfinder skips a single well, or gives the coordinates of a dry hole instead of a certified draw point, the custom is broken. And if the custom is broken, guild law strictly forbids me from lowering the draw chains at Bitterwell, 5-pint sump, and the high churn. I know the terms of the charter, Idris, I said, forcing my voice to remain as cold and unyielding as the salt beneath my boots. You do not need to repeat them in the shade of my sister's wagon. I mention it only as a friend, June, Idris replied softly, pressing his hand against his heart. If the strain of your miraculous art has clouded your mind, there is no shame in asking for an honorable postponement until tomorrow's dawn. Of course, he added with a delicate sigh. The guild gates would remain locked through the night, and your people would have to draw from their reserve casks. Our reserve casks are rationed for the trail, not for idleness at a locked gate. Sabra cut in sharply, stepping between Idris and my crate. For 1,000 people will not sit in the noon heat to spare my brother an hour of talking. He will finish the recitation, and your scribes will sign the draw permits before the sun touches the western rim. Idris looked at Sabra, then down at me, his handsome face showing nothing but polite, unruffled compliance. Then I shall not keep you from your duty a moment longer, Idris said, stepping backward out from under the canvas tarp. The chief notary is refreshing his quill with new gall ink as we speak. The 3-minute rest has nearly elapsed, Master Ossa. The platform awaits your return, beginning with well 18. Idris turned smoothly on his heel, his indigo parasol catching the blazing sunlight as he strolled leisurely back toward the muster line. The moment his boots cleared the perimeter of the wagon, Sabra dropped the linen rag into the wash bucket with a loud splash. He knows something is wrong, Sabra whispered, her face pale beneath the dark grease on her cheeks. He doesn't know what is missing, but he smells blood in the water like a salt shark. He knows well 18 is his territory, I said, pushing myself up from the wooden crate with a grimace. My boots hit the white salt crust, the heat instantly radiating up through the leather soles into the arches of my feet. June, you can't walk back up there without a name, Sabra hissed, grabbing my forearm with frantic desperation. If you name the wrong well, the recitation ends on the spot. I have to walk up there, Sabra, I replied, gently peeling her fingers from my sleeve. If I stay down here, Idris locks the pumps, and the wheel market begins dying of thirst before midnight. If I go up there, I have at least 10 seconds before the notary marks a failure. 10 seconds is enough time to find an answer, or die trying. I reached into my pack, pulled out Ovid Sarn's heavy brass-tasting cup, and hooked it firmly to the hemp cord around my neck. I checked the floating system panel one last time in the bright glare of the open flats. Second self-bound. Active copies. 1/3. Memories taken. 1. Wells remembered. 213. The numbers remained unchanged, mocking me with their cold, mechanical certainty. I had given away the 18th well to buy life for Brandt and 11 axle hands in the red sump. Now I had to stand before 4,000 people and rebuild the missing piece of the Whitepan out of thin air, logic, and sheer desperation. I adjusted the strap of my knapsack, squared my shoulders against the blinding midday light, and took my first long stride back toward the salt platform. The glare off the salt platform struck my retinas like twin needles the instant I stepped out from the wagon's canvas shade. 4,000 people stood frozen along the perimeter of the wheel market, their silence heavier than the blistering noon heat. Idris Pharaoh waited by the base of the dais, his indigo silk umbrella casting a neat, circular shadow over his polished boots. The chief notary sat with his iron quill poised over the open ledger, the black gall ink already drying to a gray crust in the parched air. Master Ossa returns to the salt, Idris announced, his smooth baritone carrying effortlessly across the breathless crowd. The 3-minute courtesy has expired to the exact second, the notary declared, tapping his brass straightedge against the writing desk. Recitation resumes at the 18th marker, the notary added, fixing his gaze on my cracked lips. I felt the 10-second silence rule pressing against my chest like an iron bar. If my throat remained shut for 10 heartbeats, the proving would be declared broken, and 4,000 wagons would be turned back into the dry waste. I touched the 18th knot on my hemp step cord, but my fingers found only an empty, horrifying numbness in my skull. The system had gouged out the name, the water depth, and the mineral tang of well 18 as cleanly as a butcher carving marrow from bone. I had no memory of Ovid Sarn ever speaking the name of that basin during our 10 years together on the trail. But I still remembered the earth on either side of the void. Well 17, Copper Lip, sat anchored in the red clay shelf, carrying 9,000 paces of runoff and an iron-heavy sulfur bite. Well 19, Salt Fork, rested 14,000 paces farther north, trapped between the twin split boulders where magnesium salt crusts the surface like frost. The land between them was not an infinite void. It was a closed geologic basin bound by the lower gypsum bluffs. If the red clay sloped north at 3 degrees, the subsurface water had to pool where the red shale collided with the white gypsum shelf. That collision always forced groundwater through compressed limestone, stripping the iron and replacing it with bitter alkali and decaying reeds. For seconds had already ticked away while the crowd watched my motionless chest. 6 seconds remained before the notary's straightedge would fall to invalidate the wheel market's passage. Idris smiled faintly, his amber eyes glittering with the polite expectation of a man who believed he was watching a bluff collapse. I drew a lungful of scalding air, tasted the alkali dust on my teeth, and let the deduction roll from my tongue with total, unhesitating force. Well 18, Bitter Reed Sump? I called out, my voice ringing hard and steady across the blinding expanse. Idris's smile did not vanish, but the fingers of his left hand tightened almost imperceptibly against the pommel of his walking cane. Distance: 6,200 paces north-northwest from the red clay shelf, following the dry wash where the gypsum fissures crack. I continued without a pause. Depth: 13 spans through fractured limestone to the gravel floor. The water carries a sharp alkali bitterness, smelling of stagnant reed rot and faint alum. It is unfit for unboiled draft stock, but safe for travel barrels if filtered twice through crushed charcoal and settled for 3 hours. The words hung suspended in the shimmering midday heat, daring the scribes to find a single flaw in the fabric of the lie. The chief notary's hand froze mid-air, his iron quill hovering a fraction of an inch above the vellum roll. 2 junior clerks frantically leafed through the heavy 9-fold survey folio, their fingers tracing the gold ink entries sealed by the great pan combine. The silence stretched across the muster flat until the creaking of an ox harness sounded like a thunderclap. Idris Pharaoh slowly raised his hand, halting his clerks before they could call the verification. A remarkably precise description, young Master Ossa, Idris said, his tone dropping into a warm, contemplative purr. You described the limestone fracture, the 13-span drop, and the alum taint with the fidelity of an architect, he noted, stepping toward the dais. There is only one minor flaw in your flawless memory, Idris added, looking up at me with genuine sorrow in his gaze. 3 days ago, my personal outriders sank their sounding rods into the Bitterreed Basin to prepare our advance troughs. They found the stone bed cracked, the reed roots withered to dry ash, and the sump bone dry to a depth of 30 spans. A collective gasp rippled through the front rows of the wheel market wagons, several teamsters instinctively reaching for their water flasks. Sabra's knuckles turned bone-white against the cedar railing of her distribution wagon, her grease goggles hiding her eyes. Idris leaned forward, resting both hands on his walking cane as he delivered what he believed was the final blow. How is it that the great Wayfinder of the wheel market recites 13 spans of water from a well that ceased to give life before the new moon? Idris asked softly. Did old Ovid teach you to read ghost water, June? Or has your split mind begun to invent mirages upon the salt? The trap was elegant, vicious, and entirely legal under the terms of the proving charter. If I conceded that the well was dry, I admitted that my recitation had failed to reflect the living reality of the road. If I argued with his surveyors, the notary would reject the entry on grounds of contested physical ground truth. But a wayfinder does not chart puddles. A wayfinder charts the bones of the earth. A merchant looks at the surface sand, Idris, but a wayfinder counts the stone beneath it, I answered, keeping my eyes locked on his without flinching. The Bitterreed sump does not draw from a surface spring. It breathes with the deep pressure of the northern salt aquifer. When the hot southern gale blows for 5 consecutive days, as it has since the morning Ovid died, the gypsum crust expands and seals the upper fissure. The water does not vanish. It retreats for spans beneath the gravel bedrock until the night frost contracts the stone. If your outriders had dug 2 feet through the dry gravel crust instead of tapping the surface with brass rods, their boots would have been soaked in cold alum brine. The well is not dead, Master Pharaoh. Your boys simply did not know how to hold a shovel. A sharp bark of laughter erupted from an old blacksmith leaning against a wheel market wheel hub, breaking the suffocating tension in the crowd. Idris did not flinch, but his eyes narrowed as he turned his head slowly toward his chief notary. The notary adjusted his spectacles, tracing a subline written in tiny crimson script beneath the gold ink ledger entry. Subsurface gravel permeability verified under Combined Geological Survey Rule 9. The notary announced, his dry voice echoing across the flat. Well 18. Bitterreed sump is confirmed and entered into the record without variance. Idris let out a quiet, appreciative breath, slowly shaking his head as a genuine smile returned to his handsome face. Splendidly argued, June, Idris said, clapping his gloved hands together once with sharp, crisp approval. Old Ovid taught you far more than simple step counts. He taught you the temper of the stone. Let us see if your discipline holds as the sun begins its descent toward the western rim. Idris stepped up onto the salt line beside me, his indigo silk umbrella held steady by a towering draft hand who marched in lockstep behind him. Under ancient custom, the examiner walks the line beside the claimant, Idris declared, gesturing forward along the white chalk boundary. 214 wells, Master Ossa, he reminded me softly, 196 remaining. I adjusted the strap of my knapsack, touched the 19th knot on my hemp cord, and took my first long stride down the proving line. Well 19, Salt Fork. I spoke into the dry wind, my voice settling back into the rhythmic cadence of the march. Distance: 14,000 paces north along the gypsum fault line. Depth: 8 spans to the split boulders. Heavy magnesium crust, drinkable only after boiling with crushed cedar bark. Recorded and verified. The chief notary called out from behind us, his writing desk being carried forward on the shoulders of 4 sturdy porters. Well 20, Red Churn. I continued, pacing out each stride with mechanical, measured regularity. Distance: 5,000 paces northeast into the red clay trough. Depth: 16 spans. Sweet water with iron silt, clear for oxen without settling. Recorded and verified. The Whitepan baked beneath the merciless sky as we walked the long, straight chalk furrow cut into the salt flat. With every 100 paces, I slid my thumb along the hemp cord, feeling the greasy knots Ovid had tied with his own hands. The floating system display remained fixed in the corner of my vision, its golden numbers burning against the glare. Active copies: 1/3. Memories taken: 1. Wells remembered: 213. I did not look at the panel, but its weight was pinned to the center of my forehead like an iron spike. Somewhere 6 leagues to the south, my flesh and blood was driving 2 mules through the blistering drifts of the red sump. According to the movement of the sun, less than 3 hours and 40 minutes remained before the heat-cooked Brant's trapped crew in their iron-strapped wagon. My copy had the route, he had the spare axle timbers, and he had the 4 barrels of wash, but he had no room for a single error in the shifting dunes. If he rolled the skiff into a hidden gypsum sinkhole, 12 men died, and my lost memory of well 18 was spent for nothing. I forced the thought out of my mind and focused entirely on the road beneath my boots. Well 34. Cinder Lip, I recited, sweat running in blinding sheets into my eyes. Distance: 11,000 paces north-northwest along the black basalt ridge. Depth: 7 spans. Sulfur water, must be aerated in open troughs before draft beasts may drink. Recorded and verified. The notary intoned, the rhythm of his quill matching the crunch of our leather soles. Idris walked beside me with effortless grace, his breath perfectly controlled beneath the shade of his silk canopy. He did not interrupt. He did not offer petty distractions. He simply listened with the predatory precision of a master scholar checking every syllable. Well 42, Blind Mule Wash, I called out as the chalk line led us past the mid-tier trade wagons. Distance: 8,000 paces due north through the Dry Creek Depression. Depth: 12 spans to the white sand table. Clean water, faintly sweet, no boiling required. Recorded and verified. By the time we reached the 50th knot, the sun had begun its brutal, oblique tilt toward the western horizon. The reflected glare off the Whitepan shifted from blinding white to a sharp, copper yellow that made the horizon warp and shudder in heat mirages. My tongue felt like a piece of salted leather wedged against the roof of my mouth. Every swallow tasted of fine gypsum powder that had seeped through my teeth despite my tightly closed lips. At well 51, the notary called the mandatory 3-minute shade courtesy, and Sabra was waiting with a fresh vial of charcoal water. She stepped between me and Idris, pressing her thumb against my temple to check the throbbing artery. "Your stride is shortening by 2 inches per pace, June," Sabra muttered under her breath, holding the brass eyedropper to my lips. "You're compensating for the heat on your left heel," she observed with cold, clinical accuracy. "The heel is fine," I whispered, swallowing the precious 6 drops of cool moisture. "How much time on the sump?" Sabra glanced at the pocket chronometer pinned inside her leather vest, shielding its glass face from the sun. 3 hours and 20 minutes before Brant's water rations run dry," she whispered back. "Your copy cleared the southern gypsum ridge 10 minutes ago. Our signal mirrors caught his dust trail heading true into the red sump. He's running the mules hard, June," she added, her fingers tightening on my forearm. Keep your mind hole up here. Time is up. Idris's polite voice chimed from 3 paces away. Sabra stepped back without a word, her grease goggles fixing Idris with a look that would have withered green timber. I stepped out from the wagon shadow, planted my boots on the white chalk line, and took a ragged breath. Well 52, Crow's Eye. I projected across the flat. Distance: 7,300 paces northeast from the basalt pillar. Depth: 5 spans. Stagnant brine, suitable only for axle cooling and hides. Recorded and verified. We walked past the 70 mark, past 80, past 90. The names pouring from my throat in an unbroken, rhythmic chant that echoed off the cedar wagon bodies. The crowd of 4,000 people followed behind us in a massive, hushed procession, their boots kicking up a low, hanging fog of salt dust. Mothers carried infants wrapped in damp linen. Teamsters walked their oxen in the traces, their ears straining for every confirmed word from the notary's lips. If I failed at well 100, the wheel market was finished. If I miscalculated a depth at well 150, the 9-fold guild guards would drop the iron portcullis over the bitter well pumps at sunset. Well 110, High Basin, I rasped, my throat raw and bleeding from the chalk dust. Distance: 16,000 paces north along the high limestone fault. Depth: 22 spans to the blue clay floor. Sweet cold water, pure as mountain melt. Recorded and verified. Idris turned his head toward me as we crossed the 120th chalk mark, his amber eyes examining the trembling muscles in my jaw. You possess extraordinary stamina, June, Idris remarked, his tone carrying genuine, unforced respect. Old Ovid used to boast that he could walk the proving with a broken ankle and a sunstruck fever, he mused. I always assumed the old man was merely exaggerating to raise his fee with the merchant masters. Ovid never exaggerated about the road, Idris, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, scraping gravel. He didn't have the imagination for it. A virtue in a wayfinder, Idris agreed, nodding slowly. Imagination is a dangerous luxury on the Whitepan, which makes that golden light you shed at noon all the more unsettling, he added, his voice dropping so low only I could hear it over the crunch of our boots. A man who can divide his flesh is no longer just a wayfinder, June, Idris murmured, looking straight ahead at the chalk line. He is an asset that the Great Pan Combine will not permit to wander the salt without a collar. Let them bring their collars, Idris, I replied, feeling the dented brass tasting cup bouncing against my ribs. They'll have to cross my road to put them on. Idris chuckled softly, a warm, melodious sound that felt completely out of place in the searing afternoon glare. I truly hope you survive long enough to try, Master Ossa, he said. Well 130, 7 spans, I shouted, cutting through his words with the authority of the road. Distance: 4,000 paces north-northwest into the white sand hollow. Depth: 7 spans. Light alkali, drinkable if boiled with sulfur meal. Recorded and verified. We passed the 150th well as the sun's bottom curve touched the ragged, heat-distorted tops of the western gypsum mountains. The blinding white glare of the Whitepan dissolved into a deep, bloody crimson that stretched from horizon to horizon. Long, purple shadows stretched out behind every wagon, making the 4,000 people look like a forest of black silhouettes against the burning sky. My knees burned with every impact against the hard salt crust, the boiled leather soles of my boots worn nearly flat by the relentless march. Well 170. Iron Sump, I called out, my voice cracking on the final syllable. Distance: 9,800 paces northeast along the red stone shelf. Depth: 11 spans. Heavy iron sediment. Must settle in wood casks for 1 hour before drinking. Recorded and verified. Idris's chief notary was sweating profusely through his linen mask, his fingers cramped into a claw around his iron quill as he scribbled the entries. Even the 4 strong porters carrying the writing desk were staggering slightly under the weight of the endless, unyielding pace. But I did not slow down by half an inch. I knew every step, every smell, and every bitter mineral vein of the northern road because Ovid had driven them into my bones with a hickory switch. Well 190. Dry reed basin. Recorded and verified. Well 200. The split kettle. Recorded and verified. Well 210. Black horn. Distance. 12,000 paces north to the jagged basalt terminus. Depth. 18 spans. Ice-cold sulfur brine. Clear for stock after aeration. Recorded and verified. The chalk furrow came to an abrupt, final end at the northern muster stone. A massive, salt-crusted monolith of gray granite standing 8 feet tall. The entire 4,000-strong population of the wheel market came to an absolute halt behind us, their breathing suspended in the cool evening wind that began to sweep down from the northern peaks. Only 3 wells remained on the ancient trade spine. The 3 wells whose Drorites Idris Pharaoh had purchased with gold tokens from the Great Pan Combine. Idris stopped 2 paces from the granite monolith, turning slowly to face me beneath the fading orange canopy of the sky. His draft hands lowered the indigo silk umbrella, revealing his sharp, aristocratic features bathed in the crimson light of dusk. "The final 3, Master Ossa," Idris said, his voice entirely free of mockery, carrying only the absolute finality of the contract. "Name the draw points that unlock the northern gate, or the road closes until the next full moon." I stepped up to the granite stone, placed my blistered palm flat against the cold, rough rock, and looked straight into Idris's amber eyes. "Well 212. Bitter well," I declared, my voice echoing across the silent plains like a bronze bell. "Distance. 6,000 paces north-northeast from the Black Horn monolith. Depth. 14 spans through white quartz gravel. Cold, sweet water with a faint magnesium bite. Ready for the bucket without settling or boiling." The notary didn't even look down at his folio. He simply nodded once, his quill slashing a black mark across the vellum. "Recorded and verified. Well 213. 5-pint sump," I continued without taking a breath. "Distance. 8,400 paces along the northern fault depression. Depth. 9 spans into compressed shale. Pure water with a limestone sweetness, safe for infants and nursing stock alike. Recorded and verified." I gripped the final knot on my hemp cord, the rough fiber biting deep into the raw skin of my palm. "Well 214. The high churn," I said, projecting every remaining ounce of strength in my lungs. "Distance. 11,200 paces due north, nestled directly within the throat of the jagged spine pass. Depth. 26 spans to the mountain bedrock. Ice-cold glacial melt, sweet as river water, flowing at 300 gallons an hour through the deep fissure." The last word left my lips and vanished into the vast, darkening expanse of the Whitepan. Absolute silence gripped the salt flats for 3 long, agonizing seconds. The chief notary stared down at his completed vellum roll, drew a heavy, double-ruled line across the bottom of the 214th entry, and laid his quill flat on the writing desk. 214 wells recited in consecutive order from the southern rim to the jagged spine. The notary announced, his voice trembling with sheer professional exhaustion. 0 omissions. 0 depth variances exceeding half a span. 0 mineral discrepancies against the sealed archives of the Great Pan Combine. The proving of the wheel market is confirmed, complete, and legally binding under the ancient law of the road. A deafening roar erupted from the 4,000 people behind us, teamsters throwing their salt-stained hats into the air and mothers weeping openly as they hugged their children. Sabra stood by her distribution wagon, her grease goggles pushed up onto her forehead, her face pale with an overwhelming relief that she didn't bother to hide. Idris Pharaoh stood perfectly still beneath the twilight sky, watching the celebrating crowd with a faint, wistful smile on his lips. He reached inside his fine silk vest, pulled out a long, carved ivory tally stick bound with 3 brass bands, and stepped toward me. "You are every bit the Wayfinder Ovid Sarn claimed you were, June," Idris said softly, extending the tally stick toward my chest. perhaps even greater than the old man ever was. He never had to pull a second pair of hands out of his own ribs to keep his people from dying in a ditch, Idris added, his eyes searching mine with intense curiosity. I reached out and took the heavy ivory tally stick from his hand, feeling the smooth brass bands that represented the drawrights to the northern wells. The wheel market draws its water at dawn, Idris, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. The draw chains will be lowered at first light, Master Ossa, Idris replied, offering a deep, impeccably polite merchant's bow. The ninefold guild honors its contracts to the letter. Before I could take another step toward Sabra's wagon, a distant cheer erupted from the southern perimeter gate of the camp. Through the gathering twilight, a two-mule rescue skiff came thundering across the white salt flats, throwing up twin clouds of gray dust in its wake. Sitting on the driver's bench, his oversized straw hat pulled low over his eyes, was my copy, grinning broadly as he cracked the leather reins over the tired mules. Pinned securely in the open bed of the skiff were 12 sunburnt, dust-caked men, their arms wrapped around the stabilized water tank as they shouted in wild celebration. Master Brant sat propped against the spare axle timbers, alive, breathing, and waving his greasy leather cap toward the cheering crowd. The rescue had succeeded. 12 lives bought at the price of a single missing well. The system panel flashed softly in the blue shadows of the evening air, visible only to me. Second self-bound. Active copies. 1/3. Memories taken. 1. Wells remembered. 213. I looked down at the ivory tally stick in my hands, feeling the cold hollow ache inside my skull where Well 18 used to live. I had saved the caravan and I had saved Brant's crew, but the Whitepan stretched for hundreds of leagues ahead of us into the darkening north. And the road was only going to get hungrier. The thunder of the two-mule rescue skiff shook the packed salt as it skidded to a halt 10 paces from the granite muster stone. A wall of powdery white dust billowed into the twilight air, coating the front ranks of the cheering wheel market crowd. Master Brant rolled out of the skiff's wooden bed, his knees buckling the instant his heavy leather boots struck the salt crust. 2 teamsters caught the old mechanic by his grease-stained shoulders before his face could hit the ground. 12 men out, 12 men back, Brant wheezed, his blistered lips splitting into a bloody, triumphant grin. The boy braced the broken axle with green timber, lashed the water tank, and navigated 3 shifting sinkholes without a single chart. A deafening cheer surged through the 4,000 gathered market dwellers, ringing out across the flat expanse of the Whitepan. Mothers clutched their children against their chests, weeping with relief as the 11 surviving axle hands were pulled down into waiting arms. Amidst the swirling cloud of chalk dust, the driver of the skiff stepped down from the wooden bench. He moved with a heavy, dragging gait, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of 80 feet of knotted hemp stepcord. Ovid Sarn's oversized straw hat sat crooked on his head, casting a deep shadow over his hollow, sun-blistered cheeks. He lifted his head, and the cheering around the muster stone died away into an eerie, suffocating hush. Every single person in the crowd froze, their eyes darting rapidly back and forth between the man on the salt dais and the man walking toward it. It was like watching a mirror step out of its frame and walk across the earth in broad daylight. My copy trudged slowly past the silent rows of wagons, his boots crunching against the crystalline salt with the exact cadence of my own stride. He wore the same sun-bleached linen trousers, the same frayed vest, and the same scuffed boiled leather boots. Across the bridge of his nose ran the identical spray of sun freckles, and on his left thumb sat the exact crooked scar from the blacksmith's tongs. He stopped 3 paces from me, his chest rising and falling in ragged, shallow gasps. The smell of hot mule sweat, sulfur silt, and baked gypsum dust radiated from his skin like heat from an open furnace. 6 leagues out and 6 leagues back, my copy rasped, his voice scraping against his dry teeth with the familiar rasp of my own throat. The southern drifts near the red sump are collapsing faster than Ovid told us, he added, wiping chalk grit from his eyelashes. You brought them home, I said quietly, looking directly into my own brown eyes. A bizarre, vertigo-inducing chill rushed through my spine, completely detached from the evening wind that was cooling the flats. Looking at him did not feel like seeing a twin brother or a stranger who happened to share my features. It felt like standing outside of my own ribcage, watching myself breathe, bleed, and slowly burn away under the sky. He knew every thought I had harbored up to the exact second I split our flesh on the salt platform at noon. But the 6 grueling leagues he had just navigated through the sweltering heat mirages belonged entirely to him. He was a piece of my life that had branched off into the waste, carrying my hands and my instincts, yet moving with an independent will. And deep within both of our skulls, the same cold, terrifying void remained where Well 18 used to live. We were both diminished men, walking the Whitepan with a hole in the catalog of our 10 years of brutal training. Sabra stepped between us, breaking the uncanny stillness before the crowd could give voice to their mounting dread. She carried 2 wooden canteens filled with cool, charcoal-filtered water, her practical eyes scanning my copy with fierce clinical intensity. "Drink," Sabra ordered, shoving a canteen into my copy's trembling hands before thrusting the second one at my chest. My copy did not hesitate. He pulled the wooden stopper with his teeth and drank in deep, rhythmic gulps, water spilling down his chin. Sabra reached out, pressing 2 fingers firmly against his carotid artery, while her thumb rested on his sweat-caked jawline. 112 beats, she muttered under her breath, checking her pocket chronometer with a sharp click of her tongue. "His pulse is identical to yours, his skin temperature is within half a degree, and his breathing is just as ragged." She looked at me, then at the copy, her grease-smudged goggles reflecting the crimson light of the setting sun. "I have managed the water rations of this market for 8 years, June," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed fear. "I know how to weigh grain, how to measure tallow, and how to count mouths. What do I do when my brother comes back from the dead, as 2 separate mouths that both need 3 pints of water a day?" "He earned his drink, Sabra," I replied, resting my hand on the ivory tally stick tucked into my belt. "He kept 12 families from starving on a dry pan." My copy lowered the canteen, wiping his wet mouth with the back of his dusty sleeve, and gave Sabra a tired, lopsided grin. "I'm still your brother, Sabra," the copy muttered softly. "I still remember when you stole Ovid's brass scales and dropped them down the dry shaft at well 4. Sabra flinched as if struck by a whip, her hand dropping from his neck as her breath hitched in her throat. "He remembers everything up to noon," I explained to her quietly. "Everything except Well 18. The floating system text pulsed gently in the blue evening air, completely invisible to Sabra and the 4,000 watching souls. Second self, bound. Active copies. 1/3. Memories taken. 1. Wells remembered. 213. The numbers remained fixed and unforgiving, a ledger of permanent loss written across the center of my sight. A soft, measured crunch of polished leather boots announced the arrival of Idris Pharaoh. The 9-fold Wayfinder strolled leisurely around the granite monolith, accompanied by 4 draft hands carrying his unrolled trade banners. He had exchanged his sun parasol for a heavy silk mantle dyed the color of twilight indigo, clasped with a silver serpent buckle. He stopped 4 paces away, his amber eyes glittering with profound, unmasked fascination as he studied the 2 of us side by side. "A truly magnificent spectacle, Master Ossa," Idris said, his warm baritone rolling smoothly over the hushed crowd. "I have read ancient fables of the twin diviners of the northern peaks, but I never expected to witness such duality with mortal eyes." He raised one gloved hand, signaling his chief notary to step forward with a velvet-lined mahogany tray. On the tray rested 3 heavy bronze tokens, each stamped with the roaring bull insignia of the Great Pan combine. "Under the terms of the completed proving, I deliver the formal draw seals for Bitter Well, 5 Pint Sump, and the High Churn," Idris announced formally. "The water rights are certified in wax, and the 9-fold guild will lower the draw chains tomorrow at first light." I stepped forward, accepting the cold bronze tokens from the velvet tray and securing them into my leather knapsack. The wheel market thanks you for honoring the road custom. Idris, I said, keeping my voice formal and cautious. We will draw our 5,000 barrels at dawn and clear your territory before noon. Idris did not turn to leave. Instead, his smile faded into a look of quiet, grave contemplation. A contract completed is a joy to any merchant. June? Idris continued softly, taking a half-step closer until his silk mantle brushed against my sleeve. Yet there are matters on the Whitepan that cannot be resolved with ivory tally sticks or notary seals. He reached into the deep folds of his indigo mantle and withdrew a heavy, rectangular object wrapped in oiled pigskin. He stripped away the leather binding, revealing a thick, rectangular tin fashioned entirely from dull gray lead. The seam of the box was sealed with 3 overlapping lines of melted red wax, stamped with a distinctive crosshook symbol. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the mark instantly. It was Ovid Sarn's personal survey brand, the iron stamp he used to seal his private road logs before he went blind in the midday glare. "Where did you get that?" I demanded, my hand dropping instinctively to the step cord at my hip. "My advance outriders recovered it 4 days ago," Idris replied, his voice dropping so low that only Sabra, my copy, and I could hear. "They found it buried 3 spans deep beneath the salt crust at the base of the Black Horn monolith. Old Ovid placed it there 2 weeks before his heart gave out in his wagon." He extended the heavy lead box toward me, the dull gray metal catching the last sliver of twilight. The box is locked with an internal iron tumbler, and the lead is thick enough to shield whatever parchment lies within from the sun's fury. "I give it to you because it belongs to the Wayfinder of the wheel market by right of inheritance." I took the lead tin from his hands, surprised by its sheer, dead weight. It felt unnaturally heavy, as though someone had poured molten river silt into the hollow casing before sealing the lid. "Why give it to me now?" I asked, looking up into his sharp, calculating eyes. "A merchant does not hand over leverage without a price, Idris." Idris let out a quiet, bitter sigh, shaking his head as he looked out across the darkening expanse of the northern flats. "Because the Whitepan is dying, Master Ossa?" Idris whispered, his usual effortless charm replaced by cold, hard reality. "You deduced the coordinates of Bitterreed Sump with brilliant geological precision on the salt platform today. You proved that the subsurface aquifer still held moisture beneath the gravel bedrock under Combine Rule 9. And your deduction was completely accurate according to natural geology." He paused, leaning in so close I could smell the crushed clove oil on his linen collar. "What my notaries did not disclose on the platform is that Bitterreed Sump was not an isolated dry bed," Idris murmured. "For consecutive wells along your northern trade spine have failed completely over the past 20 days. Sabra gasped, her hands gripping her tool belt as she stared at the 9-fold merchant. "For wells?" she whispered in horror. "That's impossible. The northern aquifer hasn't dried up since the Great Salt Drought 30 years ago." "That is precisely the point, Mistress Sabra," Idris replied grimly, turning his amber eyes toward her. "A natural drought spreads outward in circular pools as the water table drops across an entire basin. These 4 wells did not drop together. They failed one by one, in a perfectly straight geometric line running due south from the jagged spine pass. Well 16 at Crow's Wash is sweet, well 19 at Salt Fork is full, but the 4 wells in that exact northern corridor are bone-dry down to 30 spans of cracked bedrock." A terrible, heavy realization began to settle in my stomach like a block of lead. "Someone isn't waiting for the wells to fail," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Someone is killing them on purpose." "Precisely," Idris agreed, his jaw tightening beneath his manicured beard. "Someone with deep knowledge of the subsurface salt faults is systematically collapsing the northern road. Whoever is doing it is forcing every caravan on the Whitepan into a narrow, suffocating bottleneck right at the mouth of the jagged spine. If the remaining wells fail before your wagons cross the northern basin, 4,000 people will perish in the open salt without a drop of shade." "Why tell us?" My copy spoke up from behind me, his voice sharp, skeptical, and fiercely protective. The ninefold caravan owns the draw rights. If the road narrows, your guild doubles its transit tolls on every wagon in the basin. Idris turned his gaze toward my copy, his eyes studying the identical defiance in my double's posture. A dead customer pays 0 transit tolls, young man, Idris replied with dry, practical merchant logic. And more importantly, the ninefold caravan does not possess a wayfinder who can pull a second pair of eyes out of his ribs. If the northern road is being murdered, Jun Ossa is the only creature on this plane capable of charting a path around the dry corridor. Idris took 2 steps back, pulling his indigo silk mantle tight against the rising chill of the desert night. Open Ovid's box before you break camp at dawn, June, Idris advised softly. The old man knew the Whitepan better than any living soul, and he knew why the water was beginning to run backwards. If the secret to surviving the northern crossing exists anywhere in this basin, it is locked beneath that red wax. With a final, polite incline of his head, Idris Pharaoh turned and walked away toward his luxurious canopy wagons. His draft hands fell in behind him, their heavy boots kicking up faint wisps of white dust in the blue twilight. The crowd of the wheel market began to disperse slowly into the camp lanes, laughter and the aroma of roasted salt beans drifting through the cool night air. They believed the danger had passed. They believed the proving was won, the draw rights were secured, and the road ahead was open. They had no idea that the road was being systematically erased beneath our feet. I stood motionless beside the granite monolith, the heavy lead tin resting cold and unyielding against my ribs. Sabra looked at me, her eyes wide with terror behind her pushed-up goggles. For wells in a straight line, June, Sabra whispered, her voice trembling in the dark. If we hit a dry corridor between here and the jagged spine, our reserve casks won't last 4 days. We will have 4,000 corpses bloating on the salt flats before we ever see the northern mountains. We aren't going to die out here, Sabra, I said, though the words sounded hollow even in my own ears. I turned to look at my copy, who was leaning heavily against the side of the rescue skiff. He looked completely drained, the amber light that had created him fading into the deep, exhaustion-lined hollows of his face. "Can you stand?" I asked him quietly. "I can stand," my copy answered, pushing himself upright with a grim grunt of effort. "I have your stubbornness, original, remember?" He looked down at his own calloused palms, clenching them into tight, dust-caked fists. "What happens to me now?" the copy asked, his voice suddenly dropping into a quiet, uncertain cadence. "Do I vanish when you sleep, or do I stay here and eat your rations until we reach the mountains?" I looked at the floating system panel that still hung silently in my peripheral vision. Second self, bound. Active copies. 1/3. Memories taken. 1. Wells remembered. 213. The system provided no instructions, no timers, and no assurances. A copy that died simply stopped. The flesh remained, but the memory that had bought it was gone forever. "You stay," I said firmly, meeting his gaze in the dimming twilight. "You are flesh and blood, and I'm going to need every pair of hands we have to cross this dry corridor. Besides," I added with a faint, wry smirk, "someone has to help Sabra carry the water casks." My copy let out a soft, rasping laugh, shaking his head as he adjusted Ovid Sarn's oversized straw hat. "Fair enough, original," he said. "Just don't make me walk another 12 leagues tomorrow." I looked down at the locked lead tin in my hands, tracing the rough, raised edges of Ovid's crossed-hook survey brand. Old Ovid had died 6 days ago with his boots on, leaving me with a fractured road, a dying aquifer, and a mysterious power that ate my mind. I held the sealed box tight against my chest, feeling the cold weight of the metal through my thin linen shirt. The Whitepan stretched out into the vast, freezing darkness ahead of us, silent, flat, and increasingly treacherous. Someone was murdering the road one well at a time. And if I had to tear out every memory in my head to keep 4,000 people alive, I was going to find out who was holding the shovel. Would you have sacrificed a permanent piece of your own memory to summon a copy and save Brant's crew? Or was risking the caravan's mental map too high a price to pay? Next time, we break the red wax on Ovid's sealed survey tin to find out who is systematically murdering the northern wells before our water runs out. Guild members on our channel roster can already watch the next part several days early by hitting the join button right below the video. Leave a like if you respect Jun's gamble, and subscribe so you don't miss our next trek across the Whitepan.